Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa is due to touch down in the United States later this afternoon in an attempt to reset relations between the two countries. Let's now go to senior politics reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is outside the White House and joins me live now. Ziyanda, just a moment ago, of course, we had been discussing just what the permutations possibly could be at present. What is the sentiment and the mood around this? Because, of course, South Africa would want to set the road straight, but perhaps on the other side could be a sense of anticipation somewhat, or a clear wanting to understand the situation. Is that what you're feeling? Is that the sense you're getting from those you've spoken to?
Well, Arabile, I'm no longer outside the White House. In fact, we are standing by outside the venue where President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to be staying for the duration of his working visit here in the United States. And I can tell you that we're initially supposed to speak to Ziyanda Ngcobo, the Director General at DIRCO, but they're stuck in meetings as there are lots of discussions that are taking place behind closed doors. And I can tell you that at this hour, there's still a lot of consolidation of what the program is going to look like, and waiting on the Americans to tell us what and who is going to be meeting, who they're going to be meeting with from the US side, and how senior and how high ranking these officials will be. We know that DIRCO Minister is going to be here, Parkstar will be here, Minister in the Presidency Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, as well as the new special envoy Mcebisi Jonas is also going to be joining this particular delegation. Is it high powered enough? That is what a lot of people back home are asking questions about, and just how much concession will the president have to make, given the fact that we are now living in the era of transactional diplomacy. If you just look at how Donald Trump has meted out his foreign policy since returning to the Oval Office on the 20th of January. So we'll try as much as possible to get a sense of where we stand at this hour, Arabile, when it comes to the program, what kinds of preparations in terms of strategy have been put in place, in particular for the DIRCO department, because there's nothing that hasn't already been said at this stage, whether you're talking about our country's transformation laws, whether you're talking about the fact that there is no genocide in South Africa. So what strategies will DIRCO and the presidency be employing as they head into that big meeting that's taking place on Wednesday, when the two heads of state will be in the Oval Office? Will President Cyril Ramaphosa be subjected to the kind of humiliation that Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky experienced when he, in February, was also in the Oval Office and was really, spoken down at by the likes of J.D. Vance, the vice president of this country? And so there's lots to be spoken about, and I want us to listen into a piece that's been put together by my colleague Kanita Hunter, exploring these issues and what can be anticipated over the next few days.
When US President Donald Trump first accused South Africa of doing very bad things, President Cyril Ramaphosa stood firm, declaring that the country would not be intimidated.
We will not be deterred. We are, as South Africans, a resilient people, and we will not be bullied.
Ramaphosa maintained that diplomacy was the only way forward, announcing that he would send a delegation of business leaders and government officials to engage with the Trump administration.
Anybody who says things are not for negotiation is not being realistic. We live in a world where we want to promote cooperation, we want to promote dialogue, we want to promote being able to work with others.
But relations only worsened. The Trump administration escalated the situation, including signing an executive order lambasting government and expelling South Africa's ambassador to Washington. At that point, it became clear Ramaphosa would need to step in directly.
We can't go on for more months with this kind of diplomatic stalemate between ourselves and the United States. The sooner it's resolved, the better.
Public assurances that there were no land grabs or racial persecution of Afrikaners failed to ease tensions. Ramaphosa then sought a direct conversation with Trump. During an early morning call, he offered to meet in person to reset the relationship.
I said to him, I would never do that. I learned at the feet of Nelson Mandela, and we intend to proceed with the implementation of our constitutional architecture. And I thought in my conversation with him early in the morning at 4 o'clock South African time, he understood that. And I said, I'd like to come and meet him so that we can discuss this matter further.
The presidency now expects this week's talks in Washington to be constructive and collegial.
We are confident that the invitation comes from a good place of intending an engagement, clarification, and a mechanism of finding engagement. And that invitation comes because South Africa is an important player in the global forum. And that's why we're invited at this time that we are invited to go through that trip.
Ramaphosa has long emphasized diplomacy as the only solution. On Wednesday, he's expected to put his best foot forward in an effort to change Trump's view of South Africa. For Newzroom Africa on Channel 405, I am Conita Hunter.
So while we do have Ziyanda Ngcobo, of course, following the story quite vehemently for us, we also do have our own correspondent Simon Marks also on this beat. Then Simon, Ramaphosa's arrival coinciding with the hints, of course, that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is prepared to expand the so-called Afrikaner refugee program, one that might be found a little bit contentious considering this visit.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I thought the comments that Marco Rubio made in an interview that was broadcast by CBS News over the last few hours in the United States was concerning, and some might even argue inflammatory, given that he obviously will have been aware that President Ramaphosa was on his way to Washington, D.C. for these absolutely vital talks with President Trump. I mean, make no mistake, these are the most serious, high-stakes leader-level conversations between an American president and a South African president in history. We've never been at a lower ebb in terms of the bilateral relationship between the two countries. And there was Marco Rubio on CBS again claiming that farms are being expropriated from Afrikaners without compensation under the terms of the Expropriation Act. He was explicit about it in the interview that he gave, which, of course, has not occurred. And these comments come after the South African government has already made multiple efforts to correct the disinformation. It was interesting to hear that Marco Rubio played fast and loose over President Trump's claim that genocide is taking place in South Africa, because he was challenged over the fact that when an American government identifies a genocide taking place somewhere in the world, American law requires the government then to take a series of steps officially to brand the incidents genocide. And those steps are not being taken by the State Department. So he was asked why that was the case. And he played fast and loose with the language and said, well, it doesn't really matter what you call it. What is taking place in South Africa is race-based violence, and the United States will continue to call that out. So he sidestepped this issue of why the Trump administration has sidestepped its legal requirements to notify officially South Africa and the international community that the United States believes genocide is occurring. Marco Rubio also indicated more Afrikaners will soon find themselves welcomed to the United States to begin new lives, granted refugee status, fast-tracked to American citizenship, at a time, of course, when the vast majority of refugee applications from other people in other countries are being denied, and the flow of refugees into the United States has largely come to a halt. But the fact that Marco Rubio was saying all of those things in a Sunday interview did not necessarily bode well for the face-to-face conversations that are going to take place later this week in the Oval Office.
Ziyanda, this is the background under which President Cyril Ramaphosa will find himself in at this point. And we do have, of course, Ziyanda Ngcobo also following the story for us. But, Simon, it's surprising because he's also then said that the U.S. is actually playing its role as a beacon for those oppressed abroad, did Marco Rubio, then the U.S. Secretary of State. Is that a sentiment that you believe has been shared by quite a few, whether it be lawmakers, Republicans or Democrats alike then? Or does it risk being just that political hot potato that then needs to be addressed quite vehemently because Marco Rubio is more than likely to be in the room when the two leaders meet?
Oh, yeah, Marco Rubio, I'm sure, will be in the room when the two leaders meet, and if his schedule permits, so will Vice President J.D. Vance. That is the traditional way in which these things play out. That comment by Marco Rubio, by the way, was a double-edged sword, because he said that the United States is sort of tired of being lectured by other countries, and he didn't say by South Africa, but the inference.
Yeah, we seem to be losing a bit of the audio as well there with Simon. Simon, I'm not sure if you can still hear us there as well. Perhaps if I can move on to the diagnosis as well then of former President Joe Biden as well then, the harsh diagnosis, of course, of the aggressive form of prostate cancer. I'm not sure if you're still with us and perhaps you could share more on that one.
Yeah, let me just check you can hear me. Have you got me back?
Correct. Yeah, I've got you now.
Great. Terrific. So just on the Marco Rubio comments, a double-edged sword, because he was basically saying that the United States was sick of being lectured by other countries. He didn't cite South Africa as an example of countries that were lecturing the United States on its desire to be a beacon for human rights defense, but he clearly implied that South Africa was on his mind. With regard to the very sad news about Joe Biden, sympathies abound as a result of the disclosure that he's suffering from stage 4 aggressive prostate cancer that has already spread to his bones. We even saw, despite the personal animus between the two of them, President Trump issuing a statement on behalf of himself and his wife, First Lady Melania Trump, expressing sympathy and concern about Joe Biden's situation and wishing him a speedy and full recovery. But while sympathies abound for President Biden, questions also abound for him, his family members and his officials, because it is curious that this cancer was not detected earlier, given that it is stage 4, aggressive, and has metastasized. Under normal circumstances, there would have been indicators via blood tests that something was awry. And don't forget, President Biden had annual physical examinations when he was at the White House in February 2024. His White House physician insisted he was fit for duty. There was absolutely no reason why he couldn't seek a second term in the Oval Office and envisage serving in the presidency until his 86th birthday. So in an atmosphere in which already there are suggestions that a White House cover-up took place of Joe Biden's general failing capacity in his final months in office, there are now questions about whether they really have just discovered this incident of prostate cancer, or whether there were indications earlier or possibly indications that were missed. Questions stacking up now for former President Biden and his officials.
Simon Marks, thank you so much for that. Of course, we still do have Ziyanda Ngcobo as well. And Ziyanda, a little bit earlier, we're talking about U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who, of course, is likely to be in the room when the two leaders from South Africa and the United States meet. And we've seen the kind of confrontation that could be at play with that playing out with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Is there an understanding, perhaps, by the South African delegation, what exactly their main aim and main targets would be? What looks like success off the back of this trip?
I mean, you know, at this stage, we don't really have much information about their strategy going into this meeting. Suffice to say that a lot of emphasis will be placed on Cyril Ramaphosa, the man. A lot of, emphasis being placed on his experience in negotiations from the time when he was negotiating South Africa's transition from apartheid into a democratic state. How much of that will be necessary going into this meeting, given how there seems to be a sense that there is some level of humiliation that can be anticipated from the Trump administration if Secretary of State Marco Rubio's sentiments and comments in that CBS interview are anything to go by, digging in his heels. And so this is the kind of tension that we've seen playing out over the last couple of months on social media and, even in real time. And the extension of this Afrikaner program has been met with fierce backlash even here in the United States. Reporters here questioning why, how, what about the other refugees who are others from African states like Sudan, like the Democratic Republic of Congo, who are also seeking refuge in the United States. I mean, this process was expedited, really quickly for these 49 white Afrikaners. And so if you look at just those factors and just the comments from Marco Rubio, who one of the first to really launch this offensive against South Africa when he indicated that he wouldn't be attending that G20 foreign ministers meeting earlier on this year. It's very clear then that this stance is unlikely to change. So what will it take then for the South African delegation to be able to ease those tensions and really, and some are saying invoking the spirit of Mandela is just simply not going to be enough. And that's why there are questions about whether or not this delegation is high-powered enough. Maybe it needed, more bolstering. But what would that even mean, given the fact that there's also a sense that Donald Trump's administration knows exactly what they're doing? They are very clear about perpetuating this falsehood that there's white genocide in South Africa, which has been seen to be an extension of the Make America Great Again campaign, which is rooted in racism and white supremacy. And so to what end then are they going to try and continue with this stance? And will President Cyril Ramaphosa and his delegation win? Or will we be on the edge of our seats come Wednesday when President Ramaphosa is in the Oval Office? It's anyone's guess at this stage. And so we'll continue chasing, someone from the South African delegation to give us some clarity then about how they're going into this, both from an optics perspective and what we're going to see on camera, but even behind the scenes, who are they speaking to? Are they being granted access to senior officials? What has been happening and just how much can they give us given how precarious the current situation is at the moment, Arabile?
Senior politics reporter there, Ziyanda Ngcobo out of Washington, D.C. Then as we continue to focus in on this one, so too Simon Marks then, our U.S. correspondent as well, for helping us understand just the permutations, the ins and outs then as the great reset happens between South Africa and the United States. To both of you, we'll certainly be crossing through for the remainder of the week then. Thank you so much for that reporting then out of the United States.